The man at table 6 had been snapping his fingers for the last 3 minutes, not waving, not raising a hand, snapping, like he was trying to get the attention of a dog. Owen Bradshaw noticed it from across the room. He noticed it the way any decent person would, that slow, uncomfortable tightening in the chest when you watch someone being treated like they're invisible. He'd come into Millbrook Junction that morning for the same reason he came every Tuesday. Coffee strong enough to taste, a corner booth, and 45 quiet minutes before he had to pick up his daughter from her overnight at his sister's place. That was it. That was all he wanted. He hadn't planned on caring about table 6, but the man kept snapping. The woman moving between tables, her name tag read Iris, was carrying 2 full plates and a coffee carafe when the snapping started. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back tight and the kind of posture that comes from years of standing on hard floors. She didn't flinch at the snapping. She didn't look over. She just kept moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned a long time ago that acknowledging certain people only made things worse. Owen watched her set the plates down at the far booth, top off someone's coffee with a quick smile, and then turn toward table 6. He watched the man, late 50s, suit jacket draped over the back of the chair, the particular brand of impatience that money tends to cultivate. Watch her walk over like she owed him something more than the time of day. Finally, the man said, loud enough for the 3 tables nearby to hear. Do they train you people to move this slow, or does it just come naturally? Iris didn't react. Her expression didn't change. She pulled out her notepad. What can I get for you? What can you get for me? He repeated it back to her like it was a punchline. How about an apology for making me wait? How about that for a start? I'm sorry for the wait, she said. Flat, professional, a sentence she'd probably said 10,000 times. You don't sound sorry. Owen set down his coffee cup. You sound like you're reading off a script. The man leaned back in his chair. I've been sitting here for 8 minutes. 8. You walked past this table twice and didn't even look at me. I had orders up. I'll take yours now if you're ready. I'm not sure I am ready, he said. Not until you tell me why you thought it was acceptable to ignore a paying customer for 8 minutes. Owen was out of his booth before he'd made a conscious decision to stand up. He didn't rehearse what he was going to say. There was nothing to rehearse. He just walked the 12 feet to table 6 and stopped, and the man looked up at him with the mildly annoyed expression of someone who couldn't imagine why anyone would interrupt him. She wasn't ignoring you, Owen said. She was doing her job. There's a difference. A beat of silence. The man looked Owen up and down, jeans, flannel shirt, work boots that had seen actual work, and apparently decided that whatever he was looking at wasn't worth adjusting his posture for. This doesn't involve you. You were loud enough to involve the whole restaurant, Owen said. She apologized. That's more than you deserved, honestly. The man's jaw shifted. He was the kind of person who was accustomed to deciding when a conversation was over, and he didn't like that someone else was still talking. Do you have any idea who you're speaking to? No, Owen said simply. Do you want to tell me? That landed wrong. The man's face changed, not quite anger, something closer to disbelief, like he'd just heard a language he didn't recognize. My name is Richard Sloan, he said, the way people say a name they expect to mean something. I'm a regional director for Hartwell Hospitality Group. We own 14 properties across 3 states. This diner, he glanced around with the particular contempt of a man who has never had to count what he spends on lunch, is a vendor for 2 of our properties. So when I walk in here and receive substandard service, it's not just a personal inconvenience. It's a business concern. Owen didn't blink. She brought 2 other people's food out before she came to you. That's not substandard service. That's how tables work. I'd advise you to step back. I'm not close enough to need to step back. Richard Sloan stood up slowly, the kind of slow that's meant to be theatrical. He was taller than Owen by a couple of inches, and he used those inches. I don't know what you do for a living. I'm a contractor, Owen said. I build things. It's fine. But I'd think very carefully before making an enemy of someone in my position. I wasn't thinking about it at all, Owen told him honestly. I just didn't want to watch you talk to her like that anymore. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Iris had taken a half step back during the exchange. Not retreating, more like she was trying to figure out what to do with her hands, whether to intervene, whether to say something. Owen caught her eye for just a second. She looked tired. Not scared, just tired in the way people get when something has happened enough times that it stops being shocking and starts being just another thing to get through. He looked back at Richard Sloan. Are you going to order something or not? The man stared at him for another 3 seconds. Then he picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, buttoned one button with exaggerated calm, and walked out of Millbrook Junction without another word. The bell above the door rang as it swung shut. Owen stood there for a moment longer than was probably necessary. Then he walked back to his booth, sat down, and picked up his coffee. It had gone lukewarm. He drank it anyway. He didn't expect anything to come of it. That wasn't why he'd done it. He hadn't done it to be thanked or recognized or to feel like a good person for the rest of the day. He'd done it because his daughter was 7 years old, and she was watching the world figure out what kind of place it was. And somewhere in the part of his brain that was always halfway thinking about her, he'd thought, not consciously, not in so many words, this is not the kind of thing you walk past. Her name was Penny. Penelope June Bradshaw, though she'd been correcting people on the June part since she was 5, insisting her middle name was perfectly fine and she didn't know why people made faces at it. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness, and she was currently at his sister Karen's house, eating cereal and watching cartoons, and had absolutely no idea that her father had just gotten into a staring contest with a regional hospitality director. Owen paid his check and stood to go. "Excuse me," he turned. Iris was standing a few feet away, holding a to-go cup. "I topped it off," she said, "for the road." He blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I know." She held it out. He took it. "That was—" She stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "That was kind, what you did. You didn't have to do that either. It wasn't a big deal." "It was to me," she said. Not like she was asking for anything. Not like she wanted him to feel good about himself. Just a fact, stated plainly, the way she'd stated everything else since he'd walked in. He nodded. She nodded back. That was the whole of it. He drove to his sister's house, picked up Penny, listened to 40 minutes of detailed recap about a cartoon involving animated vegetables with feelings, and did not think about the woman at Millbrook Junction again until the following Tuesday. She was there when he came in. Same shift, apparently. She spotted him when he pushed through the door and something crossed her face. Not a full smile, more like a flicker of recognition that landed warmer than he'd expected. She pointed at the corner booth without him asking. He sat. She came over. "Corner booth guy," she said. "Owen," he said. "Owen Bradshaw Iris Voss." They shook hands across the table. It was a slightly formal gesture for a diner at 8 in the morning, and they both seemed to realize that at the same moment, and she smiled, an actual one this time, and it changed her whole face. "You're here every Tuesday?" she asked. "More or less. You?" "Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 2. She pulled out her notepad. "The usual?" "You remember my usual after one visit? Black coffee, 2 eggs scrambled, wheat toast, no butter," she said. "You ate half the toast and left the other half. You were reading something on your phone the whole time until the thing with Richard happened." Owen looked at her. "That's kind of impressive. Occupational hazard," she said, already writing. "I remember what people order." He watched her walk back toward the counter and thought, in a vague and uncommitted way, that she was interesting. That was all. He wasn't in the habit of thinking beyond that. There had been a brief and failed attempt at dating someone the year before. A woman he'd met through a mutual friend, nicest enough, but she'd looked at Penny the way some people look at a complicated piece of furniture that came with an apartment. Not unwelcome, exactly, but not something she'd have chosen herself. He'd ended it after 6 weeks. He was not interested in anyone looking at his daughter that way. So the thought about Iris Voss, she's interesting, moved through his head and then moved on. And he drank his coffee and ate his eggs and left a tip that was probably larger than it needed to be. The third Tuesday, she sat down across from him, not during a rush. She had a coffee of her own, a lull in the room, and she slid into the opposite seat with the particular casualness of someone who has decided to do something and isn't going to make a production of it. "Do you mind?" she asked, after she was already sitting. "No," he said. "You have a kid," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked down at his phone, which was open to a photo Penny had texted him that morning, a drawing she'd done of their dog, Harvey, who had the misfortune of being a golden retriever named Harvey and the good fortune of being deeply loved. "Yeah," he said. 7. Her name's Penny. Just you?" It was a direct question. He appreciated direct questions. "Her mom and I split when Penny was 2. She moved to Phoenix. We share—" He paused, considered the word custody, which always felt clinical. "Time. I have her most of the year." Iris nodded. "That's a lot, it is," he agreed. "It's also the best part of my life, so—" She looked at him for a moment like she was deciding something. "My dad raised me alone," she said. "My mom left when I was 4. I don't remember her that much. But I remember my dad making grilled cheese at midnight because I'd had a nightmare. I remember him driving 3 hours to watch a spelling bee." She paused. "Kids remember more than people think." Owen looked at her. "Were you close with your dad?" "We were everything to each other," she said simply. "He died 2 years ago. I'm sorry." "Me too." She took a sip of her coffee. "It made me think about things differently, about what matters." She stopped, and there was a brief flicker of something complicated behind her eyes, about what kind of life I actually want, versus the one I'd been building because it seemed like what came next. He didn't press. She didn't elaborate. They sat for a few minutes in the particular companionable quiet of two people who have decided, without announcing it, that they like each other's company. He found out on a Thursday. He hadn't planned to come in on a Thursday. Penny had a dentist appointment that got rescheduled, and he'd found himself with an hour to fill, and he'd driven past Millbrook Junction and thought, well, Iris wasn't on the floor when he came in. He took a stool at the counter instead of the corner booth. Darlene, the older woman who worked days, brought him coffee and talked to him for a while about her grandson's soccer league, and Owen was most of the way through his cup when the back door opened and Iris came through. She was in different clothes. Not a uniform. A dark blazer over a simple blouse, slacks, shoes that looked like they belonged in a different kind of room than the one they were in. She had her hair down. She was holding a phone to her ear, and she was talking in a voice Owen had not heard from her before. Not the flat, practiced efficiency of the floor, not the easy warmth of their Tuesday conversations. This was something precise and measured, the tone of someone accustomed to rooms where what they said determined what happened next. Tell Marcus to hold the Thursday call, she was saying. I'll be in the city by noon. Yes, and get me the Hartwell file. She looked up and saw him, the Hartwell file. She stopped walking. Something moved across her face. Not panic, exactly, but the expression of a person who has been walking a careful line and suddenly realizes someone is standing right at the edge of it, watching. She said something quiet into the phone and hung up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Hartwell, Owen said, as in Hartwell Hospitality Group. Iris, and this was the moment that things realigned themselves into a different shape, did not deny it. Iris Voss, she said, but also Iris Voss Hartwell. She came and sat on the stool beside him, which struck him as a remarkable thing to do, all considered. My grandfather started the company in 1974. I've been running operations for the last 4 years. Owen stared at the counter for a moment. Then he looked at her. The Hartwell file. The one about Richard Sloane. He put in a complaint, she said, about an altercation at a vendor location. He described an aggressive customer who interfered with a legitimate business conversation. Her mouth pulled at one corner. I've been building a case against Richard Sloane for 11 months. Expense fraud, vendor coercion, 2 formal complaints from staff at our Asheville property that HR buried. She paused. His little performance here gave me the last piece I needed. He documented it himself, which was genuinely helpful of him. Owen sat with this for a moment. So you work here because I wanted to understand what our vendor relationships actually look like from the ground up. She looked at her coffee cup. My grandfather used to say the only way to know how something runs is to run it yourself all the way down to the floor. I've done it at 3 of our properties. This was the 4th. A pause. Also because when my dad died, I needed to be somewhere quiet that wasn't my apartment or my office. And Darlene hired me on the spot and never once asked me anything except what size apron I needed. Owen looked over at Darlene, who was aggressively pretending not to listen from the far end of the counter. She knew, he asked. She figured it out about 2 weeks in, Iris said. She hasn't said a word to anyone. Owen thought about that Tuesday morning. Iris standing in front of Richard Sloane with 2 plates in her hands and a carafe of coffee. Absorbing his contempt with the particular stillness of someone with more information than anyone else in the room. He thought about what it must have felt like to hold all of that and still say I'm sorry for the wait and mean none of it as defeat. You weren't afraid of him, Owen said. No, she agreed, but it still, she stopped. Started again. It still felt like something having someone step in. Even when you don't need saving, it felt like something. He nodded slowly. He understood that. The value of someone seeing something and deciding not to walk past it wasn't about whether the person needed rescuing. It was about the decision itself, the choosing to see. Richard Sloane was terminated from Hartwell Hospitality Group 14 days later. The official release cited financial misconduct and violation of vendor conduct policies. The internal memo, which Owen would never see but which Iris would tell him about months later over dinner, was considerably more specific. 3 vendors who had been operating under coercive contract terms received renegotiated agreements. The 2 staff members from the Asheville property received formal apologies and back compensation. Owen found out about the termination because Iris texted him. Thought you'd want to know. He's gone. He was in the middle of helping Penny with a book report on a biography of Amelia Earhart at the time. Penny looked over at his phone with the aggressive curiosity of a 7-year-old who has inherited her father's need to know what's going on. Who's that? She asked. A friend, Owen said. What did they say? That something worked out the way it was supposed to. Penny considered this. Is that good? He said. That's good. She went back to Amelia Earhart. Owen typed back, Good, how are you? A pause. Then better. Can I buy you coffee? Somewhere other than Millbrook Junction, maybe. He looked at his daughter, who was reading aloud to herself the way she did when she was concentrating, her finger tracing each line, her small face bent down in the lamplight, with the absolute seriousness of someone for whom every sentence matters. He thought about what Iris had said. Kids remember more than people think, and about her father driving 3 hours to watch a spelling bee, and about the particular math of what gets built and what gets passed down and what a person owes the people who come after them. Yeah, he typed back. I know a good place. They met for coffee on a Saturday, then again the following Wednesday. Penny was with Karen on the Wednesday, and when Owen came home that evening, his sister called him before he'd even gotten his boots off. You were smiling when you dropped Penny off this morning, Karen said without preamble. I smile, not like that you don't. What's her name? I'm hanging up, Owen Douglas Bradshaw. If you hang up on me, I will tell Penny about the time you... Iris, he said. Her name is Iris. There was a brief pause on Karen's end that contained several different kinds of satisfaction. Tell me everything. There's nothing to tell. You were smiling, Karen said. There's always something to tell when you're smiling like that. He told her some of it. Not the Hartwell piece. That wasn't his to tell, not yet. Just the Tuesday mornings and the coffee and the conversations that had started to feel like something he looked forward to in a way he'd stopped expecting to look forward to things. Karen was quiet for a moment after he finished. She lost her dad, Karen said finally, 2 years ago. And she worked a diner floor so she could understand her business from the ground up. That's part of it. Owen, Karen said in the voice she used when she was about to say something she meant completely. That's a real person. That's a genuinely real person. He thought about Iris sitting across from him at the counter, the blazer and the blouse and the controlled precision of that phone call, and then the way she'd come and sat down beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she wasn't recalibrating anything, like she'd already decided that whatever came next, she wasn't going to perform her way through it. He said, I know. The first time Penny met her, it was an accident. Owen had Penny on a Saturday when Iris texted to ask if he wanted to take a walk along the river trail. She'd moved back into the city, rented a place near downtown while she figured out her next chapter, as she put it. He'd hesitated for exactly 30 seconds, looked at Penny on the couch with Harvey asleep across her legs, and typed back, I have Penny with me. Is that okay? The pause before her response was brief. Of course. Does she like dogs? She has a dog. His name is Harvey can come. They met at the trailhead at 11. Penny had Harvey on his leash and was in the middle of explaining to him that squirrels were not worth chasing because he always tripped on his own feet anyway, when Iris crouched down to Harvey's level and said very seriously, I've heard a lot about you. Penny stared at her. He can't talk back, Penny said. In case you were expecting that. I was hoping, Iris said, but I'll manage. Harvey, who had the social instincts of someone who has never once been turned away, climbed directly into Iris's arms and licked her face. Penny watched this with the evaluative attention of a child who has been her father's whole world for most of her life and is trying to figure out what the shape of things might be changing into. He likes you, Penny said. Her tone made it clear that Harvey's opinion carried significant weight. I like him, Iris said, scratching behind his ears. What's his full name? Harvey Bradshaw, Penny said with finality. He has our last name, because he's family. Iris looked up from the dog and met Owen's eyes over the top of Penny's head. He expected something, amusement maybe, or the careful politeness people sometimes used around other people's children, that particular brand of warmth at a distance. Instead, she just looked at him, and there was something in her face that was simple and open and entirely unperformed. She looked like someone who understood exactly what it meant to call something family, because you meant it, not because it was the default word for the situation. They walked 3 miles along the river trail. Penny talked for most of it, about Harvey, about Amelia Earhart, about a disagreement she was having with a classmate named Brody, who she felt was incorrect about the rules of a game whose rules she was also willing to concede were somewhat unclear. Iris listened with the kind of attention that wasn't condescending and wasn't performative. She asked 2 questions that made Penny think, and one that made Penny laugh. At one point, Penny took her hand, very briefly, because she needed both hands to demonstrate something with Harvey's leash, and she apparently required Iris to hold her other one in the interim. Iris held it without comment. Owen watched the river and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for a long time. He told her about Penny's mom eventually. Not bitterly. There wasn't much bitterness left, which was its own kind of accomplishment. Just the facts of it, how it had ended, the particular recalibration that follows when the life you were building turns out to be something you're building alone. Did it change what you wanted? Iris asked. For yourself, I mean. Not just for Penny. He thought about it honestly. I stopped thinking much about what I wanted. For a while, there was a lot going on with Penny, and I don't know. I think I got used to not having room for it. She was quiet for a moment. I did that too, she said. Not because of a kid. Just because the company was. There was always something that needed to be the next thing. And I was good at it. Being good at something is a very efficient way to avoid asking yourself whether you actually want it. He looked at her. Do you? Want it? Parts of it, she said. The building part. The figuring out how things work part. That's real. She paused. The part where I sit in rooms with men like Richard Sloane for hours and have to perform a version of myself that they'll accept. I'd be fine not doing that anymore. What would you do instead? She smiled, and it was the smile he'd come to recognize as the honest one. The one that showed up before she'd had time to modulate it. My grandfather started the company with one hotel and a philosophy about hospitality being the practice of making people feel that someone knew they'd arrived. He wrote it on a napkin. I have the napkin. She paused. I want to build something like that again. Smaller. Real. Something where I know every floor. Owen thought about that for a moment. About the image of her coming through the back door of Millbrook Junction in her blazer, phone to her ear, moving between worlds so practiced she barely showed the seam. About her father making grilled cheese at midnight. About the napkin. You'll do that, he said. It wasn't encouragement, it was just what he could see. She looked at him like he'd said something more than he'd intended to, and maybe he had. Months later, there would be a morning when Penny woke up early and came downstairs to find Owen making pancakes. And Harvey was under the table hoping for a structural failure, and there was a second mug of coffee on the counter that hadn't been there the night before. Penny looked at the mug. She looked at her dad. She looked at the mug again with the deliberate economy of a 7-year-old who has inherited her father's ability to observe without commenting until she's ready. Is Iris having breakfast with us? She asked. If that's okay with you, Owen said. Penny thought about it for exactly the amount of time it took to climb onto a kitchen stool. She can have my extra pancakes, she said. Round ones. I like the ones that come out weird-shaped anyway. Owen served the pancakes. Harvey sighed under the table. Outside the window, the morning came in steady and unhurried, the way good things sometimes do. Not with a flourish, not with a trumpet, just by showing up and being there, which is its own kind of arrival. Iris came downstairs with her hair still loose and took the stool next to Penny and accepted the round pancake and said gravely, This is a perfect pancake. I know, Penny said. I picked it. And Owen Bradshaw, contractor, single dad. Man who had once stood up in a diner not because he'd thought it through, but because it was the only thing that made sense. Sat down with his daughter and the woman who had walked in wearing an apron and turned out to be carrying a whole other life underneath it. And had a perfectly ordinary breakfast, which felt that morning like the best possible thing in the world.